Welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Brandon, and today we're looking at Saekano Set 1, as it is just recently released into the English format. With Set 2 announced in the near future, we wanted to just cover a deck that covered just Set 1 cards, so we can kind of get into the game, get into this kind of set, get the pieces ready, the pieces you might have already picked up, and kind of get used to playing with the cards before Set 2 comes out. Notably, those two decks, at least deck profiles that we're going to be looking at, are going to be very different regarding like how they're played. So this is able to use some of the cards you already have in preparation for some of the cards you're going to be playing with, but also additionally playing a completely different deck, so you have a different kind of setup build ready to go. This plays a little bit into the memory compression, not nearly as much as Set 2 does. With this standby pants build, really trying to play into that level 3 top end and trying to play into the top end, get it in ready to go. The standby is really much more for the mid game, to try to get that mid game pretty decently big and trying to defend that as best as it can. So you're really playing for the mid-game, end-game with this deck, and the early pieces trying to memory compress with the pieces that it has. So starting off at level 0, we have Nostalgic Memory Error. On play, give another game character 2,000 power, and then the effect, when it becomes reversed, pay 1, ditch 1, send this to memory to search for 1 game character. So this is your essentially drop search that is on reverse and gets to go to memory for free for that. So that's one of the reasons why you run this in this deck. It's a pretty helpful tool to get the pieces you need at the times you want it in preparation for the next turn. Next up, we have Unexpected Gift Izumi. This is a mill runner, as well as the ability to pay 1, send this to memory to look at the top 4, choose 1 character and add it to hand. This card technically allows a little bit of mill. It could potentially survive on the initial turn, unlikely if your opponent's going to tri-field, but it could survive on that first turn, and it's also another card that goes to memory, so it's definitely something that's playing into that early, get rid of this card, go to memory, but also trying to help you get into the next deck and pay 1 to turn this into a different card. As we continue on, we have what separates the two error. This is a level 0 assist, so it could turn your level 0s up by 1,000 power. It also, during your turn and your opponent's turn, if you salvage a character from waiting room into hand, all of the characters get -3 soul. So really, this anti-salvage is really more impactful for your opponent. This deck doesn't have salvage triggers, so you're not going to be salvaging during the turn. So having anti-salvage on board can potentially stop things like 8 salvage quints from using their salvage triggers to pick things up. You're turning choice triggers into probably just a stock, unless they want to minus their board. You're denying, say, Slime Shizu level 1 combo from either dealing damage or from salvaging characters, so you have all those things ready in place. Next up, we have Reliable Senior Utaha. When a climax is placed, you return this to hand, and you give 1,000 power to another character. So it's a way to free up a slot for that standby climax. It's also your Amagi, so you pay 1 when a climax is placed, and look it up to 4, choose 1. Potentially repeatable Amagi that can remove itself when standby is placed. So pretty effective way of kind of turning it back to hand, so you can kind of continue to play it out as you go on. We also have Image Change Megami. On play, ditch a game character from your hand into clock. Just look at the top 3 of your deck and choose 1. This allows you to be able to potentially draw into the climax you need. This also allows you to just potentially get the card you need off the top of the deck as well. Realistically, using this as like the Ricky essentially to be able to clock yourself to get to level 1 faster, so you can play out that standby and bring out level 2s. Also potentially more mill as it looks up to top 3 cards, and so it's a pretty variable tool for whatever state you're in to get the resource you need. We also run Tale About Achieving a Dream Megami. When you use an act, choose a character that gets 500 power until end of turn. You can do that once. And it's also a Brainstorm, which conveniently has your act that you can use to pay 1, rest it, and salvage a character from waiting room based off of the number of climax. Relatively straightforward profile. That 500 power is pretty helpful with zeros, especially because our 0 power line is rather small, but this allows you also to be able to get more waiting room access, which is something this deck would desperately need. This is about your only waiting room access. To round out our level 0 lineup, we also run Training Camp with Everyone Michiru. On play, reveal the top card of the deck. If it's a character, add it to your hand and discard a card. when this card attacks, you get to choose one of your other characters and give it power equal to that character's level, times 500. So you're able to power pump another lane. Notably, it doesn't power pump zeros, but everything else could get potentially another 500 power, which is helpful, as the power threshold of this deck is on the smaller side, especially early. But realistically, it's that hand filter that why you're playing this card more than anything else here. It is also blue fixed, which we do kind of need some blue for our top end. Having that in place, be able to clock this relatively early to get the pieces the colors you need is also super helpful too. Going into level 1, we have two different cards. We have this level 1 bomb that on play, you can minus 1,000 power from one of your opponent's characters. And is also, when this becomes reversed, you can reverse your opponent's level 1 or lower. Level 1 bomb to remove some of those big standby 1/1s, but it also can minus 1,000 power from something, so it can get rid of those tech tools that may be still lingering around from zero to deny them and their abilities in some way. To be fair, it denies its own on reverse drop search if it was playing the mirror. So like being able to effectively remove some of those pieces from field can be very helpful. We also then run the box topper here, Nendroid plus Utaha. So it gets 500 for each of your other characters, so potentially up to 6k. And when it becomes reversed, you can reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's level 2 or higher, you may rest it. It's a potential level 1 sitting at 6k that could, when reversed, potentially live another turn, which is pretty helpful, especially with the standby deck, because we're not generating a whole lot of resources to hand necessarily to continually replace these cards. So having this box topper on field ready to go with a decent number of level 2s is very helpful in trying to sustain in your game plan in some way, especially at 1. Notably, between the two cards, we only have 6 level 1s, which is a little bit lower than some of the decks that we showcased before, but that's because you're really playing with that standby, you're really playing into the later end of that game. Going into level 2, we have Live Costume Michiru. This is a bottom deck anti-change bomb, as well as resonates with the level 3 top end. It gets an additional 4,000 power until end of turn, so it's a 9/5 bottom deck bomb when it becomes reversed. So it can step over things that aren't level 3s, and then the level 3s that it can't step over, it can remove and send to bottom deck, so they're denied their on-core effects as well. Pretty solid profile for this, being able to potentially win offensively and still continue to cause a threat to potential early plays on the following. But typically you're playing this in response to your opponent's early play already to remove it from field and take away the effects that it has going. For example, if they have a frontal, if in the front row they have something that power pumps their entire field, being able to remove that from field and send it to bottom deck can be a very useful thing to pair in with your level 2 combo. Next up we have Icy Tail Ichika. All of your other music characters get 1,000 power. So notably that music trait has to be in the cards to be able to get that power. And that is not the main trait of the deck, so be cautious about that when you're playing with these cards. Effectively, that's only the blue cards. So when you have this in play, that power is really only going to the blue cards you have in play. It also has the ability to resonate with, again, the level 3 top end. As well as you ditching a card from hand, you're able to then choose Blessing Software Michiru from Waiting Room and spawn it on stage. Notably, because you're doing this, you could potentially do this at 1 if you stand by this out at 1. So all of a sudden you're spawning this level 2 card onto field, ready to go and attacking on your potentially second turn at level 1. So the card that it pairs with, the Blessing Software Michiru, if you have 1 or less characters in your backstage, it cannot attack. So a pretty hefty detriment there, right? However, it also has the ability as well that if you have another copy of this, it gets an additional 2,000 power, and you get 2,000 power for each copy on stage, in your center stage. So if you have 2 of these in your center stage, they're both at 10,000. If you have the back row assist, 11,500. So 9,500 with the back row assist. So if you spawn this out at 1 with the back row card, you're looking at 9,500 at level 1, which is relatively strong for not playing this directly through standby, which you could also do. You could also standby this out. So decent power line at level 1. For level 2, it's okay. It's also only a cost 1, so you can potentially spawn this out a little bit more on the cheaper side to be able to effectively try to build some kind of sustainable mid-game. To round out level 2, we have the 2/1 free fresh counter, so you can pay 2 and shuffle all these cards back into your deck. As we go into level 3, we have this early play. On play, you may heal, and when this card attacks, you can choose one of your other characters and give that power equal to the number of other characters times 500. so up to 2k power pump to another lane. It sits at 9.5 base. Being able to pump up another lane as well to potentially try to win 2 lanes, I think is actually the big part here. Power threshold for itself is on the lower side, but being able to kind of pair with something else, you could potentially start winning lanes that way. We also have Pride of the Creators Utaha. On attack, if you have another game character, you can get 1500 power until end of turn. But notably, this is also a restander. It's a pay 2, pitch 1, and remove another character from stage to waiting room to be able to restand. Notably, you can only do this and pay this cost when your opponent becomes reversed. So 11.5 to get a reverse is a little on the small side, and you can only do it on the turn that this card is placed on stage from hand. So really, you're only doing this in level 3. If you pair this maybe with the power pump that you get off of the early play, then you're looking at more like 13.5 without climax. Seems a bit more doable. 14.5 if you had the Icy Tail climax down. But notably worth noting that it gets power on its attack again afterwards, so it'll be even bigger on the follow-up swing. So if you power tie it, for example, to get that reverse, you could then turn around and have more power on the second swing and your characters to live. As we get to the combo itself, this is Icy Tail Michiru. This is the card that spawned the name for the Icy Tail effect, being put the bottom 4 cards of your opponent's deck into their waiting room and deal damage based off of the number of climaxes revealed this way. That's what we call the Icy Tail effect. That is the combo for this card. There is no ditch for this card, so the combo itself is free, partly also due to the condition of only being able to mill 4 cards. We've seen much larger Icy Tail effects as we've gotten more and more cards of this effect out there. But notably, this was like the first card that really come into popularity with that effect, from which we get the name. Obviously, it was in JP before in English, so we got other cards with English with those effects to rampant success, like we saw with Data Live. But worth noting, this is where that term comes from. It is on the Pants trigger as well, and on play heal, so you can kind of heal down a little bit, try to survive another turn, assuming that the Icy Tail doesn't close out your opponent. Icy Tails are typically weaker as they're trying to close out your opponents, but they can be effective as mill tools and decompression tools for very compressed opponents. Last up, we have the Scenario Writing in Charge Utaha. This is from the trial deck. On play heal. Also on play, this card gets power equal to the number of other characters you have times 1,000. So it could potentially be up to 13.5, 14.5 with climax. So this is kind of your board clearing thing at 3. It's also healer, so that way you can try to potentially survive another turn, but being able to clear board can definitely be something very worthwhile for you as you get to level 3. So off healer gets big. That's basically it. I found that this card was super helpful with trying to clear some of that stuff that your opponent might have lingering, especially at early 3. So you can try to heal back down to 3-0 with this card just to clear board, force your opponents to spend a little more resources. Assuming you can survive the follow-up swing, then you turn around and slam the Icy Tails and go. That's kind of where this card lies in. So it's really very similar to the early play. So depending on how you want to build the deck, you might actually just change this out and substitute this for another copy of the early play, because that could potentially come in down a little bit earlier, get that heal in and still power pump to another lane. But like this card definitely had some pretty decent uses in very some edge case scenarios, which is why I elected to keep this in this rendition of the list. So yeah, looking at it again overall, really just trying to build up the stock for the end game, try to decompress through memory. Clock compression is your friend with this deck. You're also just essentially stand by to either replace cards that were lost on field or to try to bring out some pieces to help spawn things out earlier. The power threshold of the set is on the smaller side. You're not going to see this very effectively in competitive play. It has some interesting pieces that make it at least something to keep an eye on as that time comes around. But until set 2 comes around, you're probably not going to be seeing a whole lot of this. But if you have the cards, here's a build to be able to play with the cards until you're waiting until set 2 comes out. Now, that set 2 has not received a release date as of yet, but we can expect that to be in the near future. For at least the next several months, you're unlikely to see that set coming out. We'll see some gameplay for this deck on Thursday, as well as we'll wrap up our 5 cards 5 minutes next week Thursday. A week from today, we have a clock talk. We're going to continue to look at some more of the tournament announcement. We're going to continue to look at some more of the tournament results. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.